Growing up, I always knew I was the odd one out in my family. Not just different wrong, at least in their eyes. The Andersons, my family, live for appearances. Their world revolves around status, wealth, and making sure everyone knows just how successful they are. My parents, Jonathan and Evelyn, own an upscale chain of jewelry stores, the kind where people drop a year's rent on a diamond bracelet. To them, jewelry isn't just a business, it's their entire identity. And me? Well, I was the stain on their perfect family portrait. It wasn't because I was irresponsible or lazy. Quite the opposite. I built my own company, from the ground up custom high-end motorcycles, each piece handcrafted with obsessive attention to detail. These weren't the bikes you'd pick up from a dealership. These were works of art, engineered for power and precision, each one worth more than some luxury cars. My clients, CEOs, collectors, even celebrities who wanted something one of a kind. But I never flaunted my success. I didn't wear designer suits, drive sports cars, or parade around with a Rolex on my wrist. My workshop wasn't in a glossy high-rise, but in a repurposed industrial building that I bought outright. My team was small, just a handful of people I trusted, but we had a 6-month wait list for custom orders. And the best part? My family had no clue. As far as they were concerned, I was a dropout wasting my life on a hobby. They assumed I was barely scraping by, too stubborn to join the family business. They never asked about my work, never showed interest, and I never corrected them. Let them believe whatever they wanted. It wasn't worth the energy to prove myself to people who had already made up their minds. Every visit to the Anderson household was the same. My older brother, Nicholas, would brag about his latest business ventures, a fancy way of saying he closed another deal Dad set up for him. My sister, Charlotte, the golden child who married into wealth, would sprinkle her conversations with casual name drops and stories about her high society lifestyle. And Daniel, the youngest, floated through life with the carefree arrogance of someone who never had to work for anything. Then there was me, the family disappointment. Dad's favorite question was always some version of, "Still working on those bikes?" His tone made it clear that, to him, it wasn't a real job. Charlotte once asked if I needed help finding something more stable. I had laughed it off, but deep down, it was exhausting. They weren't just uninterested in my success, they actively dismissed it. They cared about wealth, but only the right kind of wealth, the kind you could show off. So when I got the text from Dad, short, cold, and direct, I knew something was up. Family meeting, 8:00 p.m., be there. I expected a lecture, maybe a guilt trip. What I didn't expect was an intervention. The moment I stepped into my parents' mansion, I could feel it. The tension, the staged seating arrangement. My entire family sat in a semicircle in the living room, a single chair waiting for me in the center. It was laughably dramatic, like an HR meeting before a firing. Dad sat with his usual stone-faced authority. Nicholas in his business casual uniform, like he'd just walked out of a boardroom. Charlotte scrolled through her phone, probably pretending to be busy. Daniel lounged in his chair, smirking like this was his favorite new reality show. And my mother? She looked tense, hands folded in her lap, the only one who seemed uneasy about what was coming. "Take a seat," Dad said. I leaned against the back of the chair instead. "I'll stand." Dad launched into a speech, something about family unity, legacy, and responsibility. It was polished, rehearsed, and completely devoid of any real emotion. Nicholas chimed in, throwing around business terms like brand image and long-term strategy. Charlotte added her usual commentary about how my choices reflected on the family. I let them talk, nodding occasionally, pretending to listen. Then Charlotte slid a folder across the table. "This is for the good of the family," she said, all fake sympathy. Inside were legal documents. I didn't need a lawyer to understand what they were. Disinheritance papers. I let out a short laugh. They really thought this was some kind of punishment. Dad leaned forward, his tone grave. "This isn't personal, Michael. It's business. Your actions have consequences." Nicholas added, "You've made choices that don't align with our values." Charlotte nodded. "It's not just about you, Michael. It's about all of us. We have to protect the family name." I flipped through the papers, pretending to read them carefully. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for some reaction. Finally, I looked up. "Where do I sign?" The room fell into stunned silence. Mom was the first to break it. "Michael, Wait, don't you think? Nope, I interrupted. This is what you all wanted, right? To cut me loose? Let's get it over with. Charlotte blinked, caught off guard. It's not about cutting you off. It's about setting boundaries. Right, I said, smirking. Let's call it that. Dad gestured to the bottom of the page. Just sign. So I did. Without hesitation, I handed the folder back. Anything else? Dad frowned. This isn't a joke, Michael. One day, you'll understand that this was necessary. I was already walking toward the door. Yeah, I'll be sure to send you a thank you card when that day comes. I didn't look back. By the time I got to my workshop, I wasn't angry. If anything, I felt lighter. That family meeting wasn't some big revelation. It was just confirmation of what I had known for years. I was never really one of them. They had no idea who I was or what I had built. The fluorescent lights hummed as I flicked them on, filling the space with a warm, familiar glow. Shelves stacked with custom parts, half-assembled bikes waiting for the final touches. This was my real home. The only place where I ever truly belonged. Ben, my lead mechanic, looked up from the workbench. How'd it go? I tossed my bag down. They disowned me. Ben blinked. Like, officially? Yep, signed the papers and everything. He let out a low whistle. Damn, you okay? I shrugged. Honestly? Yeah, they think they cut me off, but I've been carrying them emotionally for years. They did me a favor. We worked in silence for a while, the sound of metal tools and whirring machinery filling the space. It was peaceful in a way my childhood home never was. A few hours later, I logged into my business dashboard, and a grin spread across my face. Sales had exploded. One of our latest designs had gone viral on a niche cycling forum, and now orders were flooding in. Then I saw an email from a private client. An absurd amount of money for a custom, one-of-a-kind build. I leaned back, laughing. My family thought they had cut me off. Too bad they never realized I had already built something bigger than they ever could. For the first time in my life, I was completely free. No more forced family dinners where I had to endure passive-aggressive jabs. No more being treated like the family disappointment. No more pretending to care about their world. And honestly, it felt amazing. After signing those disinheritance papers, I didn't waste a second looking back. My focus was exactly where it needed to be on my business. The custom bike orders kept rolling in. My team was thriving, and the workshop was more alive than ever. Every day I built something real, something mine. Meanwhile, my family carried on, blissfully unaware that the person they just cut loose was doing better than all of them combined. A few weeks after the family intervention, I got an email from a journalist at a major lifestyle magazine. They wanted to do a feature on me on my company, my work. Apparently, my bikes had made waves in the custom design world, and now people wanted to know who was behind them. I agreed to the interview, not thinking much of it. It was just another opportunity to talk about something I loved, but then the article dropped. It wasn't just a small write-up, it was a full spread. High-quality photos of the shop, close-ups of the bikes, even a shot of me leaning against one of my custom builds, looking every bit like the guy my family never believed I could be. The journalist had written about my journey, how I'd built my company from the ground up without corporate investors or family money. And people loved it. Within hours, my inbox was on fire. Orders tripled. High-profile clients wanted custom designs. A well-known outdoor gear brand reached out about a collaboration. My social media blew up thousands of new followers overnight. I'd always kept a low profile, but now my name was everywhere. And that's when the first text came in. We need to talk. Urgent family matters. Vanessa. I ignored it. Then another. Alex. Let's meet. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Ethan. I laughed out loud at that one. A misunderstanding? Oh, that was rich. Over the next few days, the messages kept rolling in, each one more desperate than the last. Even Daniel, who never lifted a finger for anything, texted me. Yo, you around? Stuff's happening. Poetic. But the one that made me pause. Come home. We need you. My father. That was when I knew something had shifted. Dad never asked for things. He demanded them. He was the kind of man who commanded respect simply by walking into a room. But this wasn't a command. It was as close to begging as he'd ever get. Something was wrong. A week later, I was in the workshop with my business partner, Josh, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered anyway. Michael, a familiar voice said. Too formal. Too controlled. Ethan. I rolled my eyes. I got your texts. What do you want? He hesitated just long enough to tell me everything. It's about the family business, he finally admitted. Ah, there it was. We're having some challenges, he said, clearly struggling with the words. It's not a great time for us, and we think you could help. I leaned back in my chair, smirking. I could help? That's funny. Last time we talked, I was an embarrassment to the family. My choices didn't align with your values. Remember? Michael, Ethan said, his voice shifting to that patronizing, I'm still your older brother tone. Let's not dwell on the past. This is bigger than all of us. No, I said, enjoying this way too much. It's about you, Charlotte. Dad, the fact that none of you have a clue how to adapt to a world that's moving faster than you are. He started to argue, but I cut him off. I'm busy, Ethan. If the business is struggling, maybe you should have thought about that before you decided. I wasn't good enough to be part of the family. And then I hung up. The satisfaction was delicious. A few days later, Vanessa showed up, unannounced. I was fine-tuning a custom build when I saw her sleek luxury car pull into the lot. She stepped out, wearing designer heels and sunglasses, looking completely out of place against the backdrop of grease-stained tools and half-assembled bikes. I met her at the door, arms crossed. What are you doing here? She gave me a polished smile. Michael, we need to talk. I'm working. This won't take long. She stepped past me like she owned the place, taking in the organized chaos with thinly veiled disdain. So this is what you've been doing? Yep, I said, not offering anything else. She sighed and turned to face me. Look, things aren't great right now. The business is struggling. Dad's not handling it well. Ethan's trying, but she trailed off, waiting for me to jump in and save the day. I didn't. Finally, she cut to the chase. We need you, Michael. Oh, that felt good. What exactly do you think I can do? I asked, leaning against the workbench. You've always been good with creative ideas, she said, her tone overly sweet. And you've clearly been doing okay for yourself here. I raised an eyebrow. Okay? She flinched, realizing her mistake. I didn't mean it like that. Michael, we need fresh ideas. The market's changing, and we didn't adapt fast enough. Sales are down. Dad's too proud to admit we need help, but Ethan and I think, you want me to come back and fix the business? I interrupted. She nodded. We made mistakes, I'll admit that. But we're trying to make things right. I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. Yeah, no, I'm good. Her face fell. Michael, please. This isn't just about us, it's about the legacy. I smirked. Your legacy, not mine. She started to argue, but I was done. I opened the door and gestured for her to leave. Have a nice day, Vanessa. She hesitated, then left, her heels clicking against the pavement. A week later, my father showed up at the workshop. He didn't even bother with pleasantries, just stood there, looking tired. We need to talk, he said, his voice lower than usual. I leaned against the doorframe. Do we, though? He sighed, rubbing a hand over his graying hair. Michael, I'll admit it. We were wrong. About you. About everything. I waited. The business is failing, he said. I can't fix it. Your brother can't fix it. We need your help. I stared at him for a long moment, letting his words settle. This was the man who had spent his life preaching about pride and reputation. Now, he was standing in my workshop, practically begging. I folded my arms. I'll think about it. Then I stepped aside, letting him in. And in that moment, I realized something. The tables had completely turned. Letting my father into my workshop that day wasn't about making peace. It wasn't about family. It was about control. For once in my life, I had it, and I wasn't about to give it up easily. I made him wait. No calls, no texts, no follow-ups. For days, I let them stew. I wasn't ignoring them just to be petty okay. Maybe a little, but mostly, I wanted them to feel what it was like to be powerless. They had spent their entire lives believing they were untouchable, that they decided who was in and who was out. Now, they were the ones on the outside. Josh thought the whole thing was hilarious. So let me get this straight, he said, leaning against a workbench while I adjusted a frame. They need you to save the business, but they haven't actually apologized. Pretty much. And you're just letting them twist in the wind? I shrugged. Feels fair. Josh laughed. Man, I wish I had your patience. I'd be rubbing it in their faces every chance I got. Oh, don't worry, I said, smirking. They'll get what's coming. but on my terms. A few days later, Vanessa called again. This time I picked up. "Michael," she said, her voice overly cheerful. "Thanks for finally answering. I was starting to think you were avoiding us." I ignored the bait. "What do you want?" She hesitated just a split second too long. "I wanted to check in. See if you've given any more thought to, helping out with the family business." I leaned back in my chair, smiling to myself. "I've thought about it, and I have a few conditions." Silence. Then, cautiously, "What kind of conditions?" "I want full control." She practically choked. "Wait, full control?" I stretched my legs out, enjoying this. "That's right. Here's the deal. I take over the company. You, Nicholas, and Dad stay on, but only as employees. No titles. No decision-making power. You answer to me." "That's..." She floundered, trying to find the right words. "That's not reasonable, Michael." "If you don't like it," I said casually, "find someone else to fix your mess." She sputtered, trying to argue, but I stayed firm. Eventually, she muttered, "I need to talk to Dad and Nicholas." "Go ahead," I said. "Let me know what they decide." The next day, Dad showed up at the workshop again. Vanessa must have told him everything because he didn't waste time dancing around it. "Michael," he said, sighing, "Vanessa told me about your proposal. Then you know my terms." Dad's jaw tightened. "It's a big ask. You're telling me to hand over the company your mother and I built from the ground up." I crossed my arms. "No, I'm telling you to hand over a failing company, one you couldn't adapt to survive. If you want me to fix it, I do it my way. Otherwise, don't waste my time." He was silent for a long moment. I could see the struggle in his expression, the war between pride and desperation. Finally, he nodded. "Fine. You have full control." I raised an eyebrow. "That easy?" "There's one condition." Of course there was. "I want the family name to stay attached to the company," he said. "It's all we have left." I considered it. I didn't care about the name one way or another. It didn't change who was in charge. Deal. Once they signed off, I didn't waste time. If they thought this was going to be a slow, gentle transition where they got to argue and second-guess my decisions, they were dead wrong. This wasn't a democracy. It was a dictatorship. The first thing I did was dismantle their precious hierarchy. Nicholas had been running operations like a clueless reality TV contestant, barking orders when things went wrong and taking credit when things went right. That wasn't going to fly. I called a full staff meeting at the main office managers, department heads, key employees. My family sat to the side, looking deeply uncomfortable, like kids waiting to be scolded. I stood at the head of the table and got straight to the point. "Let's get one thing clear," I said. "The old way of doing things? Dead. From now on, this company runs on results, not nepotism." A few people glanced nervously at Nicholas. He was glaring at me, seething. I pointed to the whiteboard behind me where I'd outlined a clear strategy. "We're streamlining everything. No more bloated budgets. No more unnecessary overhead. No more outdated practices. If you have ideas, I want to hear them. If you've been stuck under layers of bureaucracy, that ends today." One of the managers raised her hand. "And what about the family?" I smirked. "They'll be held to the same standards as everyone else. No exceptions." Nicholas scoffed, but I ignored him. Charlotte looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. Daniel predictably was half asleep. Next, I tackled the stores. Half of them were bleeding money because they hadn't been updated in decades. The displays were dull, the layouts confusing, and the staff looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I shut down the worst performing locations immediately. Some employees weren't happy, which I understood, but I made sure they got severance packages and job placement assistance. This wasn't about punishment. It was about survival. The remaining stores got a full overhaul. I brought in designers to modernize the spaces, turning them into sleek, minimalist showrooms that focused on the products, not outdated sales gimmicks. Then I tackled their pathetic online presence. The website looked like it was from 2005, clunky, slow, and filled with blurry images. I scrapped it entirely, hired a real development team, and launched a site that was fast, user-friendly, and mobile-optimized. Within weeks, online sales skyrocketed. The biggest change? The product line itself. For years, the company had been churning out the same gaudy, overpriced jewelry that only appealed to an aging clientele. They had completely ignored younger customers who wanted modern, sustainable designs. I changed that. I introduced a new collection, elegant pieces made from recycled materials, designed with craftsmanship and storytelling in mind. Each item came with a card explaining where the materials came from and how they were repurposed. It was a massive hit. At first, Vanessa fought me on it. She argued that it was too risky, not what our customers expect. Then the numbers came in. She shut up real fast. Within 6 months, the company was unrecognizable. Sales were up. The brand was stronger than ever. And my family? They weren't leaders anymore. They were just employees, like everyone else. One day, I called a meeting with just the 4 of us, me, Dad, Nicholas, and Vanessa. I leaned back in my chair. This company is mine now. If you want to stay, you follow my rules. If you don't like it, there's the door. Dad stayed silent. Nicholas clenched his jaw. Vanessa finally nodded. For the first time in my life, they finally understood. I wasn't the black sheep anymore. I was the one leading the charge. By the time 6 months had passed, the company barely resembled what it once was. The waste was gone. The arrogance was gone. The dead weight had been cut. What was left was lean, modern, and powerful. And I was running every single piece of it. At first, my family fought me every step of the way. Nicholas, especially. He acted like I was personally dismantling his empire, when in reality, he'd never built a damn thing. Vanessa was slightly smarter. She resisted at first, but once she realized my changes were actually working, she backed off. And my father? He was too proud to admit it, but I could see it in his eyes every time I presented the numbers. The business wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, and I had done it without them. One of my favorite moments was when I officially removed all their titles. No more executive director for Nicholas. No more head of branding for Vanessa. No more CEO for Dad. Now, they were employees. Nicholas sulked like a kid who just had his favorite toy taken away. Vanessa pretended not to care, but she definitely did. And Dad, well, he didn't say a word, just nodded and walked out of the meeting. That was the day they finally understood. This wasn't their company anymore. It was mine. Of course, fixing the business wasn't just about modernizing it. It was about cleaning up the disasters they had ignored for years. For example, their supplier contracts were a joke. They had been overpaying for raw materials, locked into ridiculous agreements because Nicholas had thought it was better to maintain relationships than negotiate too hard. Translation? He got sweet-talked into horrible deals. I fixed that fast. New suppliers, better pricing, higher quality materials. Then there were the stores. Half the locations were still stuck in the past, dimly lit, cluttered, full of desperate salespeople pushing overpriced junk. I streamlined everything, closed underperforming locations, redesigned the profitable ones, and shifted the focus to an experience, not just a transaction. And it worked. Sales doubled. Online orders tripled. We weren't just some dying luxury brand anymore. We were a movement. After a while, the shift became impossible to deny. Industry leaders started taking notice. Journalists who had once ignored the Anderson brand were now requesting interviews. We got featured in high-end fashion magazines, praised for innovation. And my family? They started acting different. It was subtle at first, the way Nicholas stopped arguing in meetings, the way Vanessa actually asked for my opinion instead of brushing me off. Even Dad softened, just a little, but I wasn't stupid. I knew what was coming. They weren't changing because they had learned their lesson. They were changing because they wanted back in. One night, after a particularly long day at the office, Vanessa invited me to dinner. Just the 2 of us. That should have been my first red flag. We met at some overpriced restaurant. She liked one of those places where the portions were tiny, and the waiters all wore suits. She started off with small talk, asking about my personal life, if I was dating anyone. I played along, waiting for the real reason we were here. Finally, she sighed and put her drink down. Michael, listen. I just want to say I was wrong about you. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, she nodded. All sincerity. We all were. You've done something incredible with the company. And I regret how we treated you. I took a slow sip of my whiskey. Huh? She smiled, hopeful. I mean it. We didn't appreciate you. And now, seeing what you've built, I just want us to fix things. I leaned back in my chair. Vanessa, are you asking for something? She hesitated. Then, I think it would be great if we could rebuild the leadership team. Bring back some of the old structure, balance things out. I laughed. There it was. You want your title back. She tried to hide it, but I saw the flicker of frustration cross her face. It's not about that. Sure it is, I said. You don't actually regret anything. You just don't like being an employee. She bristled. That's not fair. It's completely fair, I cut in. You all cut me out when you thought I was a failure. Signed the papers. Threw me away like I was nothing. And now that I've proven myself, suddenly you want to fix things. I shook my head. No, Vanessa, you're not getting your title back. And we're not a team. She looked genuinely shocked. Michael, come on, I stood up. Tossed some cash on the table. Enjoy dinner. I've got work to do. And then I walked out. A week later, it was Nicholas's turn. He showed up at my office, unannounced. He never did that. Got a minute? He asked, already closing the door behind him. I didn't bother looking up from my laptop. Make it quick, he sighed, sitting across from me. Look, I know I've been hard on you, and I just want to say I respect what you've done. I finally glanced at him. Uh-huh. He leaned forward. I think there's an opportunity here. We should be working together, Michael. We're brothers. We should be running this business side by side. I stared at him for a long moment. Then I smirked. That's funny, because 6 months ago, you sat there and watched me sign away my inheritance like it was nothing. His jaw tightened. I made a mistake. No, Nicholas, the first said, standing up. You made a choice. I walked to the door and opened it. You work for me. That's the only offer on the table. He stared at me, furious, but he knew he'd lost. He walked out without another word. I expected Dad to try the same tactics. He didn't. Instead, one night, he came to my office. Didn't knock. Just walked in, sat down, and let out a tired breath. I won't waste your time, he said. I was wrong about you. I watched him, waiting. He met my gaze. You didn't just save the business. You made it better. That caught me off guard. We've been talking, he continued. We want to fix things, not just the company, us. And there it was. I leaned back, exhaling. Dad, let's be honest. You didn't want me in the family until I became useful. Vanessa looked down. Nicholas clenched his jaw. Even Dad didn't argue. I'll keep running the company, I said. You'll keep doing your jobs. But outside of that, we're good where we are. Silence. Then Dad nodded. Fair enough. And just like that, I knew. They finally understood I wasn't just part of the family anymore. I was the one running it. After that conversation, something shifted. Not in a dramatic, emotional way. My family wasn't suddenly warm and loving. But the dynamic changed. They stopped fighting me. Stopped trying to sneak their way back into power. They finally understood that I was in charge now. For the first time, there was no illusion of family loyalty. No fake smiles or backhanded compliments. Just business. And honestly, I preferred it that way. I wasn't looking for reconciliation. I wasn't looking for closure. I just wanted to run the company without their interference. And that's exactly what I did. With them out of the way, I focused on the real work. The business was growing faster than I had predicted. The modernized stores were performing better than expected. Online sales kept climbing. The new designs were selling out within hours. We had officially shifted from being a dying brand to a dominant one. And then came the next big opportunity. One of the biggest trade shows in the industry invited us to showcase the new collection. This was huge, the kind of event that could put us on the map globally. If we did this right, we wouldn't just be competing with legacy brands, we'd be leading them. I poured everything into it, designed the booth myself, worked with my team to create an experience that would draw people in. Sleek, immersive, modern, nothing like the outdated image we'd once had. And when the event finally came, we stole the show. Journalists, influencers, and industry leaders flocked to our booth. They loved the story of the company's transformation, the focus on sustainability, the reinvention of a brand they had once written off. The attention was overwhelming in the best way. And my family? They were there, of course, but this time they weren't the center of attention. I was. They watched as I handled press interviews, as I closed deals, as people approached me, not them, for partnerships. And I knew, for the first time in their lives, they realized they weren't the stars of this world anymore. A week later, we held a quarterly review meeting. I presented the best numbers the company had ever seen. Growth across every department, record-breaking sales, our highest revenue in decades. And then, it happened. Dad cleared his throat. His voice was quieter than usual. "Michael," he paused. Then, softer than I'd ever heard him speak, "I'm proud of you." The room went still. Even Nicholas and Vanessa looked surprised. "You didn't just save the business," he continued. "You made it better." For a long time, I didn't say anything. I just sat there, letting his words hang in the air. Finally, I nodded. "Thanks." Vanessa shifted. "Dad's right," she said, forcing herself to admit it. "We should have seen your potential sooner." Nicholas, ever reluctant, exhaled sharply. "You proved us wrong. I can admit that." It was a strange moment, hearing them say it out loud. For years they had dismissed me, ignored me, underestimated me. And now, they finally saw what I had always known. I had never been the failure they thought I was. I had been better than them all along. Then Dad said something I didn't expect. "We've been talking," he said, glancing at Vanessa and Nicholas. "We want to fix things, not just the business us, the family." And there it was, the olive branch. The moment most people would take as a second chance. But I wasn't most people. I leaned back, exhaling. "I appreciate that," I said, voice steady. "But let's be honest. You didn't want me in the family until I became useful." Vanessa looked down. Nicholas clenched his jaw. Even Dad didn't argue. I continued. "I'm not interested in pretending everything's fine. What we have now works. We're colleagues. That's enough." Dad opened his mouth, then closed it. Eventually, he nodded. "Fair enough." And just like that, I knew. They had finally accepted it. This wasn't a family anymore. It was my company, and I was never giving it back. After that meeting, nothing really changed, but at the same time, everything did. There were no more fake smiles, no more forced conversations. No one pretended this was some heartwarming family reunion. The business was the only thing tying us together now, and I was fine with that. Maybe a long time ago, I would have wanted more. Maybe I would have cared about finally getting their approval. But standing at the top, looking down at the empire I had rebuilt, I realized something. I never needed their validation. I had never needed them at all. A few weeks later, I made the last major decision that would define my leadership. I called Vanessa, Nicholas, and my father into my office. They walked in cautiously, like they already knew they weren't going to like what was coming. I kept it simple. "You're all stepping down." Vanessa's eyes widened. "What?" I leaned forward, resting my hands on the desk. "You don't bring anything to the company. You just exist in it. I'm done carrying dead weight." Nicholas shot out of his chair. "You can't do that." I smirked. "I can. I am." Dad sat in silence, watching me carefully. Then, finally, he sighed. "I suppose this was inevitable." I nodded. It was. Vanessa tried to argue, tried to reason with me, but she knew. They all knew. This was my company now, and there was no room for them in it. By the end of the week, they were officially removed from leadership. They could keep their shares, cash in their dividends, but they had no say in how the company was run. For the first time, I was truly free. A few months later, I made one final change. I rebranded the entire company. The Anderson name, gone. The old legacy, wiped clean. The new brand was sleek, modern, and entirely my own. It wasn't about my family's outdated version of success. It was about craftsmanship, innovation, and the future. And people loved it. Investors lined up. New partnerships formed. The business expanded globally. The Andersons had spent decades trying to cement their name in history, and I erased it in 1 year. One night, after wrapping up a late meeting, I found myself outside my childhood home. I hadn't been there since the night they cut me off. I didn't know why I came. Maybe just curiosity. Maybe just to prove to myself that it meant nothing to me anymore. The lights were on. A familiar silhouette moved in the living room. Dad, probably watching the news like he always did. For a brief moment, I thought about knocking, about seeing if there was anything left to salvage. Then I shook my head and walked away. I had my own home now, my own world, my own legacy, and I didn't need them to be part of it. Story 2, the day. I was seated when my parents announced their impending divorce. It completely upended my world. I was only 12, and I assumed divorces were for couples who argued all the time. You know, the ones that shouted about money and smashed doors. But my parents were always extremely courteous to each other. I assumed they were simply busy, even though it had been a long time since we had gone on a family outing. My mother said, "Candy," in an oddly serene tone, "I have something to share with you, as does your father." I looked at them, sitting there on the couch, a cautious gap between them. Dad cleared his throat. "We've decided to get divorced," he said, like he was announcing we were having pizza for dinner. I blinked, waiting for the punchline, but it never came. "What?" I eventually managed to squeak out. However, why? Mom leaned out and rubbed my hand. "Sweetheart, sometimes people grow apart. Me and your dad. We wish to be with other folks that we have found." Dad nodded. "I'm about to move out. You'll occasionally stay with me, but you'll live with your mother, too." I sat there attempting to comprehend this shock. My parents were leaving each other for other people, and I was expected to. What exactly? Accept it. "Who are these other people?" I asked, my voice sounding small and far away. Mom smiled, and I realized for the first time how it didn't quite reach our eyes. "Soon, you will meet them. My friend has 2 daughters about your age. Won't it be nice? Good." I was supposed to think it was good that my parents were blowing apart our family. "My partner has a son as well," as if to sweeten the pot, Dad added. I jolted to my feet, almost toppling the coffee table. News is not what I want, brothers or sisters. I desire that we remain together. I hurried to my room, threw myself on the bed, and slammed the door. I could hear them talking in low voices downstairs, probably figuring out how to rearrange my life some more. I thought about the last few months, how Mom and Dad had taken me out separately. I'd go to the movies with Dad one weekend, then to a cafe with Mom the next. Having one-on-one time with each of them struck me as cool. I now understood that it was only the beginning. The weeks that followed flew by. Dad packed his stuff and moved out, traveling off to live with his new bride. Apparently, they'd previously been married in a quickie ceremony. As her father had predicted, she had a boy. Mom's new spouse moved in with us in the interim. A year younger than me, he brought his twin daughters. I was a little excited at first. I'd always wanted a sister to share secrets with, to stay up late chatting about boys and life and all that stuff. I made an effort to be amiable the day they moved in. I introduced myself as Candy and grinned at the girls. "Would you like to see the taller one?" I think her name was Brittany. Looked me up and down like I was something stuck on her shoe. "No thanks," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "We don't need your help." Her sister nodded in agreement. "Yes. And just so we're clear, we're not your sisters. You're just extra. The word hit me like a slap in the face. They pushed by me, laughing to themselves, and I remained there, gaping. I listened to the noises of my new family settling in. As I lay in bed that night, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The next day things got worse. The twins were dressed like me when I got home from school. "Hey," I said, shocked. "Those are mine." Brittany rolled her eyes. "We could borrow them," Mom replied. "Stop being so self-centered." I turned to my mother for support, but she only grinned. Candy sharing is now considered caring. The girls just want to feel welcome. Welcome. They were wearing my favorite clothing. I fought back tears as I stomped up to my room. It became evident as the days went by that I was no longer the focal point of my mother's life. She lavished the twins with new toys and clothing. My belongings began to vanish and were handed away to my new sisters without my consent. One day I overheard Mom talking to her new husband. "New phones are needed for the girls. We could spend the funds we had saved for Candy's birthday," she said. "My birthday? For them?" She was willing to forego my birthday. Mom hardly remembered when the day arrived. When I reminded her, she distractedly responded, "Oh, honey. I'm so sorry, but the girls have a big sports event today. We'll celebrate another time, okay?" But we never did. I imagined things may be better at Dad's house, where I remained every other weekend. But I was mistaken about it too. Due of her pregnancy, Dad's new wife was unable to spend time with her kid and me. He was a nightmare. My face started to tickle when I woke up one night. I opened my eyes and saw a huge spider sitting on my nose. I yelled, writhing about in terror. The lights flashed on, and the entire home sprang to life. I saw it was a plastic toy rather than a genuine spider. And at the doorway, Dad's stepson was smiling. "What's happening?" Dad's wife demanded, her pregnant belly leading the way as she wobbled into the room. Candy woke us all up with her screaming. The boy said innocently over a toy, "You little." I started, but Dad's wife cut me off. "Really, what's wrong with you, Candy? Are you some type of frenzied lunatic?" I looked to my father in the hopes that he would stand up for me, but he simply stood there looking awkward. He placed it there. I insisted. He is aware of my spider phobia. Avoid being absurd. His spouse lost her temper. Get out of bed and sleep. I don't want to spend the rest of the evening with you. I looked at Dad again, silently begging him to say something, anything, but he just sighed and said, "I'll take you home in the morning, Candy." As they all filed out, leaving me alone in the dark, I knew something. I didn't have a home anymore. I was alone. Life at Mom's place didn't get any better. Mom's unceasing attention and praise gave the twins the confidence to act cruelly. My favorite mug was broken on the kitchen floor when I got home one afternoon. The twins appeared as innocent as angels as they stood there. Brittany's voice was syrupy sweet as she said, "Oh, Candy, we sincerely apologize. It slipped when we were only attempting to make you some tea. I knew it was a lie. They had never made me tea, much less done anything kind for me." However, Mom and my stepdad entered before I could speak. "What's happening?" Observing the mess on the floor, Mom inquired. Candy broke her cup. The other twin piped up. She got enraged and crushed it. My stepdad's face darkened without a word. He took my arm and dragged me to the little storage room at the end of the corridor. It was gloomy and musty, packed with old cartons and neglected stuff. He pushed me inside and said, "You'll stay in here until you learn to control your temper." However, I took no action. I cried, but he just shut the door, leaving me in darkness. I heard giggling outside the door. It was the twins. "Hello, Candy," one of them called through the wood. "Did you realize there are a lot of spiders in this room? Large, hairy ones that emerge at night." Trying not to freak out, I crouched in the corner. The darkness seemed to creep around me, even though I knew they were lying. I jumped at every small sound. Hours went by. Nobody came to let me out, not even Mom. When the door finally opened, it was morning. Mom stood there, looking exhausted. "I hope you've learned your lesson," she said. "Now get ready for school." She just waved me away when I tried to explain what had actually transpired. I understood then that my mother would always trust them instead of me. I began to visit my Aunt Sarah's place more and more. She lived with her husband and was Dad's sister, Uncle Tom. They were always delighted to see me because they didn't have children of their own. I used to only spend a few hours after school with them, but those hours quickly became days, and eventually I was spending weeks at a time. My instructor, Miss S. Rodriguez, made a home visit to my mother's house one day after I'd been at Aunt Sarah's for over a month. Naturally, I was not present, but a neighboring child who witnessed the entire event told me about it afterwards. With a worried expression, Miss S. Rodriguez knocked on the door. When Mom answered, the teacher asked to see me. "Oh, Candy's with her father this week," Mom said dismissively. Miss S. Rodriguez scowled. "That's strange. Mr. Johnson told me that Candy was living with you when I called him just now." Mom's face turned white. "What?" However, I believed Miss S. Rodriguez was enraged. She alerted Child Protective Services, and before I knew it, we were all heading to court. At the age of 14, I watched in the courtroom as my parents quarreled over who should look after me. However, the debate wasn't what I had anticipated. "You take her," Dad roared at Mom. "I have a tiny child. Teenagers are not something I have time for." Mom laughed. "Are you kidding? Now, I have a life. I can't deal with Candy's drama." I sat there feeling smaller and smaller as they tossed me back and forth like a hot potato. They both didn't want me. Aunt Sarah, however, got to her feet. "Your Honor," she began in a firm, clear voice, "permit me. I want to assume custody of Candy with Tom." The courtroom became quiet. I stared in disbelief at Aunt Sarah. She smiled at me, then went back to the judge. She gave the judge some papers. "These records indicate our financial soundness. I'm a teacher, and Tom's a doctor. Candy is something we can supply in any manner." After reviewing the documents, the judge turned to face me. "Candy," he said kindly, "you are of legal age to make this decision. With whom would you like to live?" I didn't think twice. Uncle Tom and Aunt Sarah. I spoke in a trembling yet confident tone. I could see my parents' relief. They made no effort to conceal it. I adapted to my new life over the course of the following few weeks. Uncle Tom and Aunt Sarah were looking after more than just me. They were parenting me. They inquired about my day, genuinely listened when I spoke and assisted me with my homework. Uncle Tom inquired, "So, Candy, what should we call each other now?" As we were seated around the dinner table one evening. "We're officially your guardians." I paused to reflect. In just a few weeks, I had received more love from these people than I had from my own parents in years. "Could I? May I call your parents?" With hesitation, I asked. Aunt Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Oh, dear. We'd be honored. They became my parents after that day. My birth parents faded into the background. As time passed, I thought about fewer and fewer people. My new life wasn't just about Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom, though. I also got to know Uncle Tom's mother, my new grandmother. She lived close and rapidly became one of my favorite persons in the world. Grandma was a retired doctor, and she had this way of making everything interesting. She would tell me stories about her time in the hospital, as we spent hours in her garden growing flowers and vegetables, and I realized I also want to become a doctor. With Grandma's help and the unwavering support of my new parents, before I knew it, I threw myself into my studies. High school graduation was coming up. As I stood in my cap and gown surveying the crowd, I saw the faces of the individuals who genuinely mattered. Mom, Dad, and Granny all beaming with delight. My birth parents weren't there. They hadn't even sent a card. I applied to medical college and, to my delight, got accepted on a full scholarship. It was a nice life. I had a loving family, a clear objective, and a bright future ahead of me. 3 years went quickly in a frenzy of lectures, late-night study sessions, and clinical rotations. Every time I put on my white coat, I felt a thrill of satisfaction, knowing I was living the ideal Grandma had helped to nurture. That's why when Mom and Sarah called me that rainy Tuesday afternoon, I knew something was terribly wrong. Before she even spoke, "Candy? Honey," she said, her voice cracking. "It's grandmother. She's gone." The world stopped whirling. Grandma. Lost. It couldn't be. We had plans to review my latest paper this weekend. In a year, she was meant to attend my graduation. The following several days passed in a whirl of emotions and whispered discussions as we gathered for the burial. I felt like a small girl again, bewildered and afraid, standing between Mom and Dad, Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom. But then came the reading of the will to my beloved granddaughter, Candy. The lawyer read, "I leave my whole estate, including my house and all my money, consisting of $1980. Oh. I gasped, looking around the room in shock. This had to be a mistake. But Mom and Dad were nodding, little grins on their tear-soaked cheeks. "Grandma talked to us about this," Dad explained later. "She was concerned about giving you a strong start in life." We both agreed that it was the proper course of action. As the dust cleared and I attempted to come to grips with my unexpected fortune, life threw me another curveball. My phone started ringing with unexpected numbers. I was so shocked when I finally answered one that I almost dropped the phone. "Candy, hello. It's your mom." It had been years since I heard her voice. She hurried on before I could answer her. "You've been on my mind a lot lately. How are you? Where do you study? Over the coming days, we ought to catch up." Similar calls came in from my birth father. Suddenly, they were both passionately interested in my life, asking to meet, talking about how much they missed me. Confused and a little suspicious, I mentioned it to Mom and Dad over dinner one night. They started giggling, which surprised me. "Candy. Oh, Candy," Mom said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "I hate to tell it, but I suspect they could have gained wind of your inheritance." I wanted to pretend that I had never received those calls, to disregard them. However, there was an intriguing aspect that I believed I had long ago forgotten. How would it feel to see them once more? To demonstrate to them the woman I had become on my own? Perhaps, maybe I should meet them, I said slowly, just to see what they want. Mom and Dad exchanged a glance. "If that's what you want to do, we'll support you," Mom said. "But be careful, sweetheart. People may surprise you, and not usually in a good way." The following day, I was standing on the porch of the house I had known since I was a child. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The door swung open and there she was, my biological mother. We merely gazed at one another for a while. "Candy." She took a breath. Tears were streaming from her eyes. "Oh, my darling daughter." She drew me into an embrace that felt stiff and uncomfortable across her shoulder. I could see my stepfather and the twins hovering in the background, plastered on smiles on their faces. Come in," my mother encouraged, urging me inside. It was a peculiar dinner. The twins were sickeningly adorable, a far cry from the harsh females I recalled. "Thank you very much for being here." "Candy," one of them. "I feel sorry. Brittany, I believe we've missed you so much." I noticed a flicker of annoyance in her eyes that belied her words, but I merely smiled and nodded while we ate. The topic of conversation changed. With a dramatic sigh, my mother looked around the dining room. She shook her head and remarked, "This old house, hasn't it seen better days? The roof has to be replaced. And don't even get me started on the plumbing." I sipped my water without uttering a word. Naturally, my stepfather added that the daughters would soon be attending college. "Well, you know how pricey it can be." I pretended to be quite interested in my mashed potatoes. "It's really unfortunate," my mother said, her tone brimming with phony worry. "The daughters are quite intelligent, but given our financial circumstances," she trailed off while giving me a hopeful glance. I looked her in the eyes steadily, but remained silent. The quiet dragged on, becoming more awkward by the moment. At last, I made the decision to shift the topic. Brightly, I said, "I've been wondering, what grades did I have at the end of high school?" I can't recall exactly. The hue vanished from my mom's visage. She opened and closed her lips a few times, appearing like a fish out of water. "I mean, I do. It was a very long time ago." My version, however, was verified. She had no idea about my life, my accomplishments, or my challenges. She only knew that I was wealthy. Right now, I sprang to my feet, my chair scuffing the floor. "I believe I understand why you asked me to come." I spoke in a surprisingly composed tone. "Isn't it about my inheritance?" There was silence in the room. The twins discovered their plates all of a sudden, and my stepfather's cheeks flushed. Very intriguing. "How are you able to say that?" Although my mother gasped, it was clear from her eyes. There was only calculating and disappointment, no maternal love or tenderness. My stepfather, Candy, began, but I interrupted him. "No, I'm done here. Never get in touch with me again." I then left the echoes of their irate yelling and my own history behind and stepped out into the crisp night air. I didn't need their approval or their affection. At home, my own family was waiting for me. A few days later, I was standing in front of my father's door. The door swung open, revealing my stepmother. She appeared to have just bitten into a lemon as her face twisted into what I thought was supposed to be a kind grin. I repressed a smile and went inside. We entered the living room. A teenage boy was relaxing on the couch when I looked at him. As we walked in, he looked up, and I knew who he was right away. The spider thrower. He had matured much, and I was surprised when he smiled at me with real friendliness. He got up and said, "Hey, Candy. It's been a while. I'm Jake. Just in case you forgot." Before I could answer, a whirlwind of pigtails and glitter burst into the room. In front of me, a young girl, no older than 8, came to a stop, her eyes wide. "Who are you?" she made a demand. My father, appearing older and more exhausted, cleared his throat. "This is Lily. Candy, this is your sister." My stepmother asked me a lot of questions about my life, and I gave her the most evasive answers as we fell into an unpleasant chat. Jake asked about my medical studies with what seemed to be genuine curiosity, which surprised me. I sensed that the talk was moving toward the true purpose of this reunion as the evening went on. My stepmother would nod slightly in encouragement as my father continued to look at her. He cleared his throat at last. "Okay, Candy." His tone was too casual when he started. "We heard about your windfall." I stiffened, anticipating the next move. "You know, Lily here is quite the little genius," he continued. "We have been considering enrolling her in this esteemed private school. However, it's not inexpensive." I remained silent. My face is deliberately blank. My stepmother took over. "What your father is trying to communicate, Candy, is that we could use some support for Lily's future. You get it?" I inhaled deeply, sensing that I was running out of patience. "Why now?" I looked straight at my father as I asked, "Why do you only think of me now that I'm wealthy?" Deathly silence fell on the room. Even Lily, who had been playing with her toys, appeared to notice the tension. My father tried to stutter out an apology, but my stepmother's face abruptly contorted with rage. "Listen to me now." With all pretense of kindness gone, she hissed, "You have a duty to support your family. We'll take you to court if you don't. You owe us money, and we'll want our portion." I was unable to resist. I chuckled. "As a matter of fact, I stood up in accordance with the law. You're not my family at all. You abandoned me. Keep in mind that Uncle Tom and Aunt Sarah are now my legal parents." As I left the building, I heard my father's irate yelling and my stepmother's high-pitched voice. However, I didn't turn around. I felt a range of feelings as I got into my car and drove off, including grief, rage, and most of all, relief. My phone buzzed nonstop in the days after I saw my biological parents. Both of them began sending voicemails, texts, and calls, each one more urgent than the one before it. "Please, Candy." In a single message, my mother's voice begged, "The house is going to be lost. We're going to be homeless. You don't give a damn?" My father used a variety of strategies, from guilt-tripping to direct demands. One text read, "This is your way of paying us back for everything we've done for you." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I concentrated on my academics and threw myself into my last year of college with a fresh sense of purpose. I was looking through a particularly difficult cardiology textbook one evening when a strange call appeared on my phone. "Hello, Candy. It's Jake," I said hesitantly. "I suppose you're your stepbrother." Now, I realize this is strange, but I wanted to express my regret for the spider incident that occurred years ago. It was a really poor decision. In spite of everything, I couldn't help but smile. "Jake, it was a long time ago. It's water under the bridge." "Really? No," he insisted. "I felt awful about it for years. I wanted to apologize sooner, but you never returned. And I promise, this isn't about the money or anything. I suppose I wanted you to know I'm not that foolish child anymore." It was heartwarming how sincere he was. "Thank you, Jake." "Really?" We ended up talking for over an hour. Jake was an engineering student in his first year of college. He was self-deprecating and humorous. By the conclusion of the call, it was no longer the spoiled child I recalled. The next week, we had decided to get together for coffee. Jake and I became true friends as the months went by. Finding a connection with someone from my previous life was odd, but it was satisfying. He became a pillar of support in my life, and we frequently got together for study sessions or coffee. In the meantime, my life was accelerating at an uncontrollable rate. The exhausting tests and sleepless nights were worthwhile. When I eventually accepted my college degree while standing on stage, I noticed Mom, Dad, and Jake applauding enthusiastically as I peered out into the crowd. Joy and appreciation filled my heart. Eventually, my biological parents' messages became less frequent. Jake informed me that they were having financial difficulties, but I stayed away. It wasn't out of spite or hate anymore, but a knowledge that we were on separate paths. Jake brought up my half-sister Lily, his younger sister, one day when we were out for coffee. "She's very intelligent," he remarked. "I read a lot and asked questions about everything except my stepmother and father. Not that they're promoting it." I remembered the bright-eyed young girl I had met a short while before. "Perhaps," I added slowly, "I might establish a college fund or assist with her studies. For her, not for them." That night, while I was driving home, I thought back on the path that had taken me to this point, the suffering, the desertion, the surprise bequest. I was Candy Johnson, a doctor. I now have a promising career in medicine. I had Jake, a great friend, a loving family, and the resources to change the life of a little child. Story 3. Mom grinned as she sliced the Thanksgiving turkey. "Your miscarriage has kept our family line pure." Relatives broke into laughing as my sister patted her son's head. "Isn't one actual grandchild sufficient?" None of them realized this would be their final family get-together, so I put down my fork and got to my feet quietly. I sipped my coffee and looked out my window at the garden covered in frost. The temperature had dropped, suddenly announcing the arrival of winter in Minnesota. Autumn leaves were still present in our garden, which is located in the affluent area of Eden Prairie. In the early light, the frost on the fallen leaves glistened. Another Thanksgiving season has arrived. My work as a senior accountant at a big accounting company was going well. My marriage to David was steady, and I had no problems about living in this place. The only relationship that remained delicately strained was with my mother. "Amy, are you ready?" From behind me, David called. When I pivoted, my spouse had already put on his suit and was carrying his bag for the trip. He had been slowly growing his career as an IT-firm executive. He was the perfect husband, gentle, considerate of my job, and always encouraging. "Indeed, I'm fine. Don't worry," I smiled in response. David would miss this year's Thanksgiving, owing to an important business meeting. The outcome of his company's new initiative might be determined by this important business trip. "Have you told your mom?" "Indeed. But she wasn't happy about it," she said. "It's unbelievable that you're working before Thanksgiving." I mimicked my mother Martha's words as an influential member of the First Presbyterian Church. She was a powerful woman, As a prominent member of the community, she oversaw the church's social events and charity endeavors. Thanksgiving was more than simply a time for family get-togethers for Mom. It was the ideal chance to introduce the neighborhood to her ideal family. Mother often used the phrase pure bloodline. She most likely did so to show her pride in belonging to a prominent family that has roots in this country for many centuries. But after what transpired 2 years ago, that word occasionally took on a harsh connotation. I had finally gotten pregnant at that point, but I miscarried. My mother's attitude gradually altered after that. Even yet, she continued to appear loving. There were times when I glimpsed flashes of what appeared like relief in her countenance. In the meantime, she became more and more devoted to my sister Linda's son, Tommy. Linda was a dedicated homemaker, heavily interested in religious activities. Even when parenting her 5-year-old son, Tommy, she tended to rely a lot on her mother, giving her thoughts priority. John, her spouse, had a real estate business. Though honest in nature, he had recently showed signals of anxiety over changes in his wife's conduct. David touched me on the shoulder. "Are you all right?" "Indeed." I grinned as I looked at my hubby. "Do not be concerned. I'll take care of it my way." David gave a quiet nod. He was aware of my emotions. That's presumably why he felt awful about this work trip. I should leave. I got up and escorted my spouse to the exit. A cold wind blew in. Tomorrow was Thanksgiving. Mother's house would host a large family gathering for supper. My sister Linda, her husband John, and their son Tommy would accompany her. Linda has been acting peculiar recently. Adam Foster, the associate pastor who had just moved in 6 months prior, appeared too close to her. Despite being well liked by the female members of the church, the dynamic young assistant pastor's relationship with Linda was obviously out of the ordinary. I let out a long sigh. Tomorrow was Thanksgiving, the ideal dinner party hosted by Mother, an exquisite table arrangement in a vast white mansion for a family get-together. However, behind it all, something was undoubtedly beginning to go wrong with my cool-headed and collected demeanor. It was as obvious to me as day. I had a strong sense that the moment for the revelation of this important truth was drawing near, and my accountant's intuition told me that it was being concealed. Our family's existence might be fundamentally altered by what was about to occur. However, it could have been fated. That's what I felt. It started off chilly in the van on the way to Mom's place on Thanksgiving morning. I turned up the heat and tried to calm my racing heart. There were sporadic snowflakes dancing in the dreary, dark sky beyond the windshield. Mother's home was located in one of the most affluent areas of Eden Prairie. One of the town's features is the enormous White House, which has been passed down through the centuries. There were already a number of vehicles parked in the entrance's circular driveway. Relatives were starting to assemble as I opened the front door. Mother's voice rang out. Martha had already made perfect preparations. A navy blue dress with a pearl necklace. Her graying hair was properly combed, and her makeup was expertly done. Is David truly unable to attend? She seemed to have been waiting to pose the inquiry. There was a tiny tone of displeasure in Mother's voice. "No, he has a crucial business meeting," I explained. "Well, I guess it's unavoidable. You young people always put work before family." I went to the kitchen, ignoring the irony in their remarks. Not at all. The meal preparations were already being assisted by Carol and my cousin Jennifer. In the oven, the bird had already begun to brown wonderfully. "I'm happy we could be of assistance, Amy." Carol cried out to me with a look in her eyes that may have been pity or sympathy. Family members' perceptions of me have gradually changed in this way since my miscarriage 2 years ago. Soon then, the doorbell rang. Linda's family's arrival. "Come to Grandma, Tommy." Martha raced forward, nearly ready to embrace her grandchild the instant she spotted him. Tommy was 5 years old when he joyfully giggled while being held by his grandma. Linda was behind them, looking pleased. Her husband, John, looked somewhat uneasy and glanced briefly at me while waiting for dinner preparations to be completed. The typical small conversation, church activities, neighborhood rumors, and school anecdotes for the kids all took place in the living room. But to me, the talk sounded weirdly empty. In particular, I noticed that Linda was avoiding any mention of the new assistant pastor. "Dinner is ready then." Everyone started to move to the dining room as soon as Mother's voice could be heard clearly in the living room. Expensive Lenox china was used to arrange the table, and silver candlesticks held flickering candles. The golden brown turkey sat in the middle. "Let's say a prayer," Everyone sat down, folded their hands, and bowed their heads. Martha began reciting the prayer. Her voice was full of its customary assurance and majesty, and we thank you for all the benefits showered upon us. Amen. After the prayer, the serving of meals began. Martha started carving the turkey with a big silver knife that had been handed down through the generations. Her movements revealed years of experience. Amy, you're always so focused on work. Aunt Carol addressed me. Isn't it time to discover a new life purpose? Yes, Jennifer added, cousin. God sometimes sends us challenges for a reason. It was obvious what those words meant. They were referring to my miscarriage 2 years ago. I lowered my gaze to the food on my plate in silence. Okay, but Martha suddenly spoke up while carefully carving the turkey. In an unsuitably upbeat tone, she said, "Your miscarriage prevented the tainting of our lineage." Like an ice sword, those words slammed into the dining table. Yet the relatives rushed to laugh to my ears. They sounded cruelly silly when they laughed. And then came the decisive blow from my sister. Linda smiled broadly as she stroked her son's head. After all, a genuine grandchild is all we need. There was a moment when time seemed to stop. I silently got out of my chair and set down my fork softly. Suddenly, everyone at the table looked at me. Amy. Mother's voice had a little tremble in it. I apologized for a moment. I declared this gently but strongly and exited the dining room behind me. There was a pause, then a series of bewildered noises. I stepped in front of the living room's huge window and gazed out. The light snow had evolved into real snowfall without my noticing. White snowflakes were softly dancing down into the darkness. The view had a curiously relaxing impact on my heart. After a while, I turned to hear noises coming from the kitchen. John was standing there. The expression on Linda's husband's face was clearly troubled. Amy, I need to talk to you. His voice was different from his typical confident tone as a real estate firm president. It possessed a mixed tone, blending worry and determination. Actually, something's wrong with Linda. I gave a silent nod. John peered around nervously, then continued in an even quieter voice. She's been meeting with the young assistant pastor often. And he paused for a bit and let out a heavy sigh. I want to get a DNA test for Tommy. Will you assist me? In that instant, all the parts connected in my head. Their fear gave way to confidence. The analytical abilities of my accountant had already started gathering several types of circumstantial evidence. I understand. Silently, I replied. The truth revealed on this Thanksgiving night would forever change how our family existed. However, it was an inevitable fate. I was sitting in my home office looking at my computer screen 3 days after Thanksgiving. David was still abroad on his business trip and in the silent house. The only sound that reverberated was typing. The DNA test kit was ordered by me. Last night, John had sent an email. I bought a commercial testing kit from Amazon, he claimed. Tests that were previously exclusively accessible at specialist institutions are now accessible to everyone thanks to modern technologies. However, I had other investigation methods. I was able to use my expertise as an accountant to follow people's behavioral trends by looking at their numerical footprints. As the person responsible for auditing First Presbyterian Church, I began by looking through the church's accounting records, to which I had access. Ever since Adam Foster's appointment, I have meticulously reviewed every document. This is, I noticed, strange expenditures in the church's charity activities monies. Every month, a fixed amount was being transferred to a specific account. The quantity wasn't much, but it was suspiciously regular. What are you looking into, Amy? I slammed the screen shut at the abrupt voice. When I pivoted, my mother was there at my study doorway. Mother, just work, getting ready for the audit of the church. Although my mother appeared to accept, there was still uncertainty in her eyes. You acted in a really rude manner throughout Thanksgiving dinner. Your comment was, Mother, consider the reputation of the family. I was interrupted by Mother, especially now that Linda's about to take on an important position. A key role? Indeed. Linda has been suggested by Assistant Pastor Adam to lead the youth department. I couldn't help but scowl at those words. Youth department head. That was a position with tremendous power in the church. However, why? Linda. I continued my inquiry when Mother departed, this time looking through Linda's behavior logs. Her phone logs, social media activities, and credit card usage history. All of it was captured as digital traces. Every Wednesday afternoon, patterns were apparent. Linda would go out citing church meetings. Nevertheless, the church's official schedule for those periods did not list any meetings. Then I discovered conclusive proof. Grayson is a small business hotel located in the Minneapolis suburbs. For the previous 6 months, Linda's credit card had been making consistent payments there. "I found something, John." The first picked up the phone and called my sister's husband in private. "What are you saying?" "Linda has been attending a certain hotel every Wednesday, and a portion of the expenses are covered by the church's charity contributions." John sighed deeply on the other end of the call. "That's not all," I continued. "There's a good chance Linda knew Adam before Tommy was born." "What are you saying?" At that time, Adam was conducting a short internship at this church as a seminary student. The church records have it. There was silence. That quiet was akin to the quiet before a storm. "We may not have to wait for the results of the DNA test." John didn't respond to what I said, but over the phone I could hear his labored breathing. The evidence collection proceeded for another week. Use my accounting knowledge. After that, I found more and more proof that Adam and Linda were together. Records of restaurant receipts, hotel reservations, and most importantly, anonymous transfers between them. The flow of monies disguised as church charitable operations. Even if it was deftly hidden, an expert could see it. Adam has been using church finances to sustain his connection with Linda, but there was an unanticipated consequence to this inquiry. I also found out about Mother's wrongdoing when looking through the church's accounting records. Martha Anderson has been misappropriating church cash for personal purposes for years. While the amounts were trivial, it was a serious reality. I sighed deeply after saying this. This evidence would be an effective tool for controlling Mother, but I was not sure if I should use it or not. The pivotal moment arrived in a surprising shape. One afternoon, Linda suddenly visited my house. "Amy, you're probing me, aren't you?" My sister's voice was a mixture of dread and rage. "What are you discussing?" Adam informed me that someone has been looking through the church's financial documents. I gazed at my sister in silence. Panic and dread flickered in Linda's eyes. "Please don't say anything." Her voice abruptly became imploring. "If this comes to light, Mother will. The church will be honest with me." Silently but firmly, I said, "Tell me everything." Then Linda started talking. "Adam was a seminary student when I first met him 5 years ago. Their secret romance and Tommy's birth. His mom. No." Linda put both hands over her face. "Yes, but in order to protect the family's reputation, Mother hid everything." My cell phone rang at that very time. A call from the hospital was displayed on the screen. "Hi, Miss Anderson. Your mother has been rushed to emergency. We think it's a stroke," following the phone call. I turned back to Linda. My sister was looking pale. When we got at the hospital, Mother had already been transferred to intensive care, awaiting. Among them were Adam Foster and other church authorities. The doctor said that the mother had abruptly passed out during church. The cause was shock at receiving an anonymous letter of accusation at the church. That letter described Adam and Linda's friendship, as well as Mother's appropriation. "Who?" Linda's voice was shaking as she spoke. I gazed out the window into the overcast sky in silence. In the Fairview Southdale Hospital waiting room, snow had started to fall softly, as though it were attempting to cover all that was going to happen with a white blanket. Snow was still falling outside the window in the pitch-black darkness from the intensive care unit. Her condition is stable, and she occasionally hears the regular sound of machines. While obtaining the doctor's explanation, I made an effort to remain calm. Thankfully, Mother's stroke was detected early, but it was impossible to completely rule out the potential of after effects. "Let's meet as a family," Linda said, her voice shaking. Linda, John, David, who had hurried back, and I, Adam, were already out of the waiting room, church authorities urged. John's mouth widened wide before that. "The results of the DNA test are in." I held my breath. Linda's face lost its color. David stared at me, trying to figure out what was going on. John choked on his words. "Tommy, he's not my child." There was silence in the room. That quiet pushed down on our shoulders like thick weight. Linda. Silently, the first turned to face my sister. "Tell us everything about Mother, about Adam." My sister covered her face with both hands and stayed still, but after a while she lowered them and gave us a red-eyed gaze. "When Adam, a seminary student, visited the church 5 years ago. Linda's confession started. As though discharging a long carried weight, her tale developed in bits and pieces. Adam was a seminary student when they first met. Secret rendezvous, the terror when pregnancy was revealed, and Mother's choice to expedite Linda's marriage to John. Mother knew everything. David couldn't help but interfere. Indeed, Linda gave a little nod. To preserve the family's reputation, Mother hid everything. She even used church funds to pay Adam hush money. Involuntarily, my voice became icy. Linda nodded in silence. The findings of my investigation were exactly in line with her confession. Mother's misuse of church funds. Adam, hush money. It was all a plan to preserve the family's reputation. What did you intend to do? Anger made John's voice waver. For what length of time were you intending to keep lying? I, Linda, stumbled. Mom, reputation. At that moment, there was a sound coming from the nurse's station. By the time we turned around, consciousness had returned, and Mother's bed was being moved back into her room. The paralysis on the right side persisted. The nurse said, "You may come now, but please don't excite her." We visited Mother's hospital room one by one. When I entered last, Mother weakly opened her eyes. Amy, Mother's voice had lost its old power. In my luggage, I took up Mother's purse. Inside found the church's bank book and a notepad tracking dealings with Adam Byrne. Everything. I can't, I replied firmly but quietly. Let us stop keeping all the secrets. That evening, the church's board of elders was immediately assembled. Adam Foster's inappropriate relationship and suspicions of church fund misappropriation were officially addressed as agenda items. The outcomes were as predicted. Adam was fired right away. Mother's place in the church was essentially taken away. In a sense, Linda was exiled from the congregation. The news spread very swiftly. This episode was widely reported in local newspapers as a church scandal. Scandal shocks respected church. The reality behind the senior family headlines after headlines cut into our life. We discussed Mother's care as a family a week later. The medical social worker recommended that the best option would be a nursing home. Linda protested vehemently. "You're planning to abandon Mother even now? Face reality," I responded quietly. "Mother requires skilled attention." And I paused for a moment. This decision is for all of us. In the end, it was agreed that Mother would go in. Amy. Mother stopped me on discharge day. Her right side paralysis hadn't fully recovered yet. Perhaps you were correct. I was unable to respond to those words. I merely clutched her slender hand strongly. But, Mother went on, try to comprehend how I feel about preserving the family's good name. I do understand. I responded calmly, but reputation based on falsehoods will inevitably fall. Tears glistened in Mother's eyes. It might have been the most sincere expression of emotion she had ever displayed. For the first time in a long time, David and I ate dinner together that evening. You did well. My spouse grasped my hand. What now? Outside the window, snow continued to fall silently. All signs of the past appeared to be obscured by the accumulation of snow. However, new shoots were undoubtedly starting to breathe beneath it. I'm thinking about looking for a new residence. I grinned as we began our new life a little distance from this town. David gave a quiet nod. His eyes were filled with love and understanding. Indeed, this isn't the end. A fresh beginning has begun. Truth sometimes asks a painful price. However, without incurring that cost, true happiness cannot be obtained. That's my opinion. A year has passed since then. In western Minnesota, David and I had moved into a new house in a residential development. The drive from Eden Prairie takes 2 hours. It seems like the ideal distance. In the kitchen of our new home, I was preparing to roast a turkey outside the window. Gentle snow was falling. There wasn't the harsh cold of last year. Need help? David called from behind. He put his arms over my shoulders tenderly. Thank you, but I'm all right. I smiled as I turned around. The adoption agency's lay papers were on the table. We were making steady progress towards starting a new family. It feels nostalgic, I said, gazing into the distance. Last year at this time, our lives had drastically changed since last Thanksgiving, as though everything had been washed away by a storm. Mother spends her peaceful days at a fancy nursing facility in suburban Minneapolis, having lost her former dignity and social prominence. She seems to be confronting herself for the first time during my recent visit. Mother spoke to me with an unusually candid expression. Amy, I might have been wrong. The right side paralysis was gradually improving thanks to rehabilitation. However, the wounds in her heart hadn't healed yet. I was so concerned with looks. I lost sight of what was actually essential. There was a trace of regret in Mother's eyes that I had never seen before. From the nursing home window, the garden was well kept, as you could see. Mother's new life was apparently mirrored by the nurses pushing wheelchairs there. Linda had a more spectacular fall. The divorce was finalized, and John got custody. Only once a month, and even then, under supervision, is she allowed to see Tommy. She lost all social support when she was expelled from the church. Sister. Last week, Linda abruptly visited our new house. The sight of my skinny sister left me stunned. I need to borrow money. Her relationship with Adam had already ended too. After being expelled from the church, he had moved to another state. He wasn't paying any child support. I apologized. I replied strongly but softly. I won't clean up your messes anymore. Linda left in tears. Her receding physique didn't even preserve a ghost of my once gorgeous sister. John, however, had started down a different route. Having taken Tommy into custody, he was devoting all his attention into his son's schooling, while facing the truth that he wasn't Tommy's biological father. He treated his son with the affection of a real father. John recently visited Tommy and remarked, "I can't thank you enough, Amy. Thank you for revealing the truth." Tommy is still too little to grasp the situation, but he's growing up healthily, surrounded by his father's affection. Seeing that is a great comfort to me. The church's unrest was slowly coming to an end. The embezzled money was being returned, and a new assistant pastor had been appointed. Bit by bit, combined with Mother's nursing home costs, our finances aren't exactly easy, but that's the result of our choices. The smell of the turkeys is getting better. David's voice snapped me out of it. Indeed, a savory aroma was beginning to waft from the oven. This year's Thanksgiving will be a quiet celebration, with just my husband and me. Our recently acquired dishes and a white linen tablecloth complete the table. It's not extravagant, but it's a space that warms the heart. David looked at my profile and said, "Hey, are you content?" After giving it some thought, I nodded slowly. Yes, we're truly happy now, in the real sense. Eventually, happiness based on deceit and lies will fall apart. That was the lesson Mother learned throughout a lifetime. And through that pain, we found a new happiness outside the window. Snow continued to fall quietly. The white crystals gently wrapped the earth, seeming to announce the arrival of a new season. Surely fresh branches will grow come spring. That's how our lives too will move forward, slowly but surely. Oh, by the way, David added, picking up the adoption paperwork next Thanksgiving, we could be celebrating as a family of 3. I squeezed my husband's hand. A new form of family. Perhaps that's a genuine bond, unrelated to bloodlines or appearances. Indeed, this is the path we've chosen. This is our new kind of existence, found by choosing truth and eliminating deceit in the oven. The turkey was gently browning to a lovely golden hue. Its aroma suggested not bitter memories like last year, but a future full of hope.